understands what is being communicated and responds accordingly. Nothing could be easier, right? However, difficulty in communication is one of the most common problems in marriage. Why is that? Why is it that something that should be so simple is so incredibly difficult for so many of us? Well, please excuse me for stating the obvious, but a big part of the challenge of communicating in marriage comes from the fact that men and women are so very different from each other. There's a lot of sectors of society, they don't like hearing that men and women are different from each other, but we are. Men and women tend to see things from very different perspectives. Not all the time, but often. As I put it on the first note in the note sheet provided in the bulletins, men and women often process information in different ways. Men and women, not all the time, but often process information in different ways. Part of this is because of differences in the brain structures of males and females, especially in regard to a part of the brain called the corpus callosum. Now, I don't have time to give more detail about that. But basically, the result of this difference is that most, not all, most women tend to be able to use different parts of their brain at the same time more easily than most men, who tend to use just one side of their brain depending on the task at hand. Now, part of what this means is that, generally speaking, women tend to be much better at multitasking than men are. Generally speaking. Not all women are like this, not all men are like this. But most women tend to be better at multitasking than most men. For example, the average woman is usually able to have a conversation with her best friend and also be generally aware of where all three of her children are in the house and have some basic idea of what they're doing, all at the same time while she's having the conversation. She's able to process data coming at her from different sources at the same time more easily than most men can. For example, I am terrible at processing data coming to me from different places all at the same time. I'm terrible at multitasking. When I go to visit people in the nursing home, it's very common for that person that I'm visiting to have their TV on in their room. To be honest, it is so difficult for me to carry on a conversation with them while their TV is also on. And usually, a lot of them tend to be hard of hearing, so the volume is not low, it's up fairly high. Now, I can either listen to the person or I can listen to the TV. I can't do both. Now, I know that maybe you're thinking, well, Kevin, it sounds pretty simple. Just ignore the TV. But I can't help wonder about what's going to happen on Bonanza. Does Little Joe make it or not? So it's easy to get drawn into the story. That's what's usually playing most of the time. I don't know why. It's usually Bonanza is what they have on. And it's easy for me to get drawn into this. So what I usually do is I usually ask the person if we can either turn the volume down or turn the TV off while we're having our conversation. I am terrible at multitasking. Women tend to be better at multitasking than men are. On the other hand, men tend to be better at giving focused attention to one thing at a time. For example, if a man is having serious problems in a certain area of his life, he can usually push those thoughts and feelings over to a certain room in his mind, close the door, and then be free to focus on whatever is right in front of him, get the task accomplished with minimal distraction, and then at a later time go back and deal with that problem area once he's ready to focus on just that. Authors Bill and Pam Farrell take an interesting approach to help us understand how this difference between men and women affects the way we think. They write, and I put it on the note sheet, that most men are like waffles. Most men are like waffles. Now, why is that? What do they mean? Waffles are divided into little squares or compartments, right? Well, men tend to put the different parts of their lives into separate compartments or boxes in their minds. And the following is important. Listen. They tend to focus on only one box at a time. That's the way that most, not all, most men prefer to deal with life that way. They'll stay in that box until the task is accomplished or the problem is solved. Then they'll move on to the next thing. As the next note sheet says, the note on the note sheet says, most women are like spaghetti. Most women are like spaghetti. What is meant by that? In their minds, all the different parts of their lives are connected and intertwined. They're interrelated. Every part of their lives relates to all the other parts. And they have no problem thinking about different areas of their lives all at once. Now, before we go any farther with this, as we talk about differences between men and women, I want to emphasize something. What we're talking about are general tendencies. We are not talking about absolutes. Not all men are like waffles. Not all women are like spaghetti. As a matter of fact, I have known some men who had spaghetti brains and some women who have waffle brains. I've even met couples where definitely the husband was spaghetti and the wife was waffle. But what I'm sharing are characteristics that most men and women tend to have. So as I'm sharing this, if you're sitting there thinking, well, that's not me, it may not be you. But you need to be aware of how different people's brains are wired so that you know better how to communicate with someone else, whether it's a family member, a friend, or your spouse. So, how does this waffle spaghetti difference affect the way husbands and wives communicate? In the early years of our marriage, Felicity and I owned a couple of dogs. 2 long-haired Jack Russell Terriers. Felicity already had the dogs when we married. So, when I married Felicity, I got the dogs as part of the bargain. Okay, so that helps to understand what I'm talking about here. There was already a long-standing emotional connection with the dogs that Felicity had before I ever entered the scene, right? One of the dogs was as sweet as he could be. He was so sweet. He was a great dog. His name was Scruffy. The other dog was a psycho. And Felicity will admit this. He had issues. He drove me nuts. He and I, it took a long time for us to get along well. I remember in the early years of our marriage having a conversation with Felicity, and in the conversation I began sharing my frustration regarding the behavior of the psycho dog. She responded to my comments and then took the conversation in another direction and then in another direction, to where only after about 3 minutes of conversation, it came down to the fact that the real problem was that I wasn't doing all I was supposed to do in regard to the housework. Now, I'm thinking, I was talking about the dog, and how did we get... You went here and you went there and you went directions we weren't supposed to go. That's not what I was talking about. And what I wanted to do was to throw up a little yellow flag and say, offsides, 5-yard penalty, still first down. But in her mind, here's the thing. In her mind, in her defense, all of the different things she mentioned really were related. I'll bet many of you ladies are sitting here thinking, they probably were related. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And I'll bet many of you men are probably sitting here thinking, thank you for talking about this out loud. Because we've all been there. We were dealing with this, and then all of a sudden, she brought this into the conversation, that into the conversation, and I'm trying to deal with it all, and then finally it's just, okay, honey, I surrender. Here's the white flag. I was thinking like a waffle. She was thinking like spaghetti. Or here's another example. And we saw a little bit of what I'm going to talk about in this example. We saw a little bit in the skit earlier. Let's say that a husband has spent all day at work. For 8 to 10 hours, in his mind, he has been in the work box. Then finally, he gets to go home. In his mind, he leaves the work box and enters into the I am finally at home box. As he arrives home, he meets his wife, who also has just gotten home from work. What's the first thing that she'll probably say? How was your day? How was work? Now, to him, this is frustrating. Because he's thinking, I just spent all day in the work box. I've been in that box all day. I don't want to be in that box anymore. Now I'm finally in the, I get to be home with you box. That's the box I want to be in. I don't want to go back in that box. But now she's asking me to go back in that box, think through it, and rehash it all over again. I don't want to be in that box anymore. So when she asks, how was your day? He says, it was fine. This response frustrates her. Because she's thinking, why don't you ever open up to me? Why won't you share your life with me? Because for her, it's usually no effort to talk about her day. Because for her, whether she's at work or at home, it's all interrelated anyway. Why wouldn't you talk about it? He's thinking like a waffle. She's thinking like spaghetti. Okay. Ladies, I could get in trouble with some of my male colleagues for sharing with you what I'm about to share. But I'm going to let you in on a little bit of insight in the male mind. For most men, one of the boxes in the waffle of their mind is the nothing box. What's in the nothing box? Nothing. It's empty. It's a box where we go when we just want to chill out and relax. This box is a stress-free zone. It's a stress-free box. It's part of how we deal with stress. Is every once in a while we go to the nothing box. Now let's say that a husband is in his nothing box. It may be sitting there watching TV or just whatever, but he's in the nothing box. His wife sees him sitting there looking calm and relaxed, and she very reasonably thinks this might be a good time to talk. So she sidles up to him and she says, what you thinking about? And he, of course, responds by saying, nothing. To her, this is an obvious lie. Because from her perspective, she's thinking, how could you not be thinking anything? You see, guys, bless their hearts. Most women don't have a nothing box in their minds. They wish they did, but they don't. They're always processing all sorts of things. So she thinks, when he responds, nothing, she thinks he just doesn't want to share his thoughts and feelings with her. But the truth is, he probably really was just thinking nothing. Because after all, that is the name of the box. And if you're going to have a nothing box, you might as well use it. Every once in a while. Our problem, guys, is we tend to spend too much time in the nothing box. It's not that we spend time at it. It's just that, if you're, 40% of your time's in the nothing box, you're not an overachiever. We'll put it that way. Now, the reason that I'm talking about how some men are like waffles and some women are like spaghetti is not to change the way you think. If you're getting defensive, well, I can't help being spaghetti, I can't help being waffles, then just calm down. Because I'm not trying to change the way you think. If you're a waffle, you're a waffle. If you're spaghetti, you're spaghetti, whether you're male or female. I'm talking about this in the hope that if we understand how our spouses think, then maybe we'll be more patient with them. Maybe we'll even learn to speak in ways that they understand. For example, ladies, when you're having a conversation with your husband, if he's a waffle brain, you need to understand that every time you head in a new direction in that conversation, in his mind, it's like opening up another box. And usually, each box seems to him like a separate problem to solve. Am I right, guys? Opening up another box, that goes in this direction and that direction. Now, he's going to try to follow you because, believe it or not, he probably does love you. So he's going to try to follow you and keep up with you. But here's the thing. If you open too many boxes, at some point, his brain, it's going to overload. You've opened more boxes than he can process at once, bless his heart. Now, at that point, different men respond to this situation in different ways. Some men, they get real impatient. Honey, can we just cut to the chase? Some men get frustrated because they're trying to process all this data like a computer that doesn't have enough RAM, doesn't have enough memory. It just, everything slows down. Or, most commonly, I believe, he may just tune you out. Ladies, have you ever been in a conversation with your husband and you're talking and at first you can see in his eyes he's listening, but at some point a flip is switched and you can see this glaze just come over his eyes and the truth is he's not listening to a thing you're saying. Have you ever been in that situation? Now, maybe he is a selfish, inconsiderate clod that doesn't love you. But more likely, what probably happened is this dear, sweet man who loves you more than his own life just had his brain explode. Because you opened so many boxes that he just ran out of RAM, his computer and his brain just shut down. And now he's sitting there desperately hoping that you're not going to ask him what he thinks about everything you've just said because he only remembers the first 3 minutes of the conversation. Was I too honest about that, men? Did I? Okay, I'm so sorry. So, here's the thing, ladies. If you want to get feedback from him in the conversation, you need to try to open no more than 2 or 3 boxes at once. Husbands, if your wife starts to open too many boxes at once, perhaps you can very gently say to her, honey, too many boxes. Too many boxes. It's not you, it's me. I can't follow that many boxes. Let's deal with the first 2 or 3. Then we can get on to whatever you want to get onto. But gently say, honey, too many boxes. On the other hand, gentlemen, we need to know that sometimes she may need to really talk things through and go in all sorts of directions. Because that's the way that many, not all, but that's the way many women manage their stress in their lives and the way they process different parts of their lives. It's part of how they work through it, is by doing that. So, listen, if that's what you need to do, ladies, if that's all you're needing to do, you're just needing to kind of think through it and process it, then perhaps you can gently let your husband know early in the conversation, honey, I don't need you to solve all this. I just need you to listen. Now, if you tell him that, here's something I need to tell you. You need to understand how incredibly difficult it is for us men to not want to try and solve or fix everything. And I've got a little video to help you understand it from the male perspective. I have a team that works with me to plan the creative elements in the sermon, and we debated over whether or not to show that. Because I thought, oh man, it's so much from the male perspective. I wanted something from the female perspective. And one of the things they said, Kevin, most of the stuff we see on TV and in movies is from the female perspective. Show the video. So, there you go. Ladies, when you just want us to listen, you don't want us to fix everything, it's very difficult for us to not try and fix it. But here's the thing. If that's what you need, ladies, if you just need to process it, then what you need to do is let us know right up front, honey, I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to listen. That way, husbands, you can know that the only box you need to be in at the moment is the show my wife how much I care by listening to her box. So it takes some pressure off you, and you can focus in on what she's saying without feeling like you have to think through a 5-step process for solving every single box she opens. Let go of that. Just listen. And another little something, I hope I'm right about this. I'm not a woman, so it makes me scared to talk about what it's like from a female perspective. So please don't hate me if I'm wrong. But much of the time, women will be much more open to receiving the input on how to fix the problem if they first feel that you have empathized with them, that somehow you're tracking, honey, I see how that's so difficult. I feel your frustration with that. In other words, you validate the feelings, and then lots of times they'll be more open. But what most men want to do is, honey, there's a game coming on in 15 minutes. Can't we just cut to the chase? Here's what you need to do. You need to do this, 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 this. And it comes across to her like, you don't really care about me. Is that clear enough? Am I in trouble? Here's part of what I'm getting at. I put this as a note on the note sheet. Effective communication is dependent on effective listening. In case you didn't get that. Effective communication is dependent on effective listening. Please take your Bibles and turn with me to the book of James, New Testament book of James, chapter 1. That's page 854 in the Bibles provided in the pews. James, chapter 1. Some verses, these are some of those verses in the Bible, some of the many verses in the Bible every Christian should commit to memory. Okay? James 1, verse 19. The apostle writes, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Let me ask you, those of you that are married, can you honestly say that you are quick to listen to your spouse? Would your spouse say that you are quick to listen to him or her? Now, perhaps you're thinking, oh, I listen all right. I hear what they say. But understanding where they're coming from is another thing entirely. Truly listening to someone involves more than just hearing their words. It's not just being able to repeat verbatim what they just said. Truly listening involves a willingness to take the time to clarify what he or she does not mean. Well, how do you do that? I put this on the note sheet. One of the best ways to try to understand what someone is trying to say is by practicing reflection. Reflection. Now, what does that mean? This is when you reflect back to him or her what you thought they were saying and give them a chance to affirm or deny your perception. In other words, after your partner makes a statement, respond by saying something along the lines of, "Okay, so are you saying that?" And then you repeat in your own words the way what they said came across to you. And then that gives them the chance to either say, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Or they might say, "What? Is that how that came across? No. That's not what I meant. Here's what I meant." You would be amazed at how many arguments can be avoided just by practicing this simple approach. And when you're in that situation and your spouse says something that just hits you the wrong way, try to remember this. Before you let your emotions run away and you get quick to anger, hit it on pause, hit the pause button and say, "Okay, wait a second. So are you saying that?" Put it in your own words, and then they can respond and clarify. James 1:19 says that we should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Are you slow to speak? In your conversations with your spouse, or for anybody else for that matter, are you slow to speak? Another way to ask that question is this: are you slow to jump to conclusions? Some of us have a problem with that. Our spouse, or really sometimes anybody else, will be telling us something, and what we'll do is we'll already be processing and have our mind made up where they're going with the conversation, and have our mind made up about what they're really meaning. They didn't say this, but I know what they really mean. Drop that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't try to read their minds. You can't read their mind. Say, "We've been married for 50 years. Probably, maybe 6 or 7 out of 10 times, maybe you can read their mind. But you're not going to hit it every time. So make sure you don't jump to conclusions. Give them the floor. Allow them the chance to speak. And then reflect back. Okay, are you saying da-da-da-da-da? Don't jump to conclusions. Proverbs 18:13 says this: "Spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish." Spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. Effective communication is dependent on good listening. Also, next note on the sheet, in order for communication to happen, each spouse must be willing to communicate. Each spouse must be willing to share with each other. Now, I know that statement I just shared sounds so obvious. You might be thinking, why do we even have to say that? Duh. If you're going to have good communication, each spouse must be willing to share with the other. But the truth is that many spouses aren't willing to open up and share their deepest thoughts and feelings with their partner. Several different things can cause this. I think that one of the things we tend to think when someone is not willing to share is that they must be hiding something. They've done something wrong and they don't want it to come out. Well, that certainly can make someone unwilling to communicate. But that's not always the reason. One of the main reasons people don't communicate has to do with this truth. I put it on the note sheet. Most people will share their deepest thoughts and feelings only if they believe it is safe to do so. This is a big deal. Don't overlook this. Most people will share their deepest thoughts and feelings only if they believe it is safe to do so. And that's not just true in marriage. That's true in conversations between parents and children. That's true in conversations in a church, conversations with friends. That's true. We see that even in the national life in America. Most of the time, people aren't going to say what they really think unless they feel it's safe to do so. That's part of the reason why on the internet, if you look at comment threads or what people post, in response to different things, people will be so much nastier on the internet than they will in person. Why? Because they feel like they can get away with it. They feel like it's safe to say what they really think. And apparently, if you read some of the comment sections and all these different things, we got a lot of frustrated people in this country. Because it just kind of spills out, doesn't it? Most people will share their deepest thoughts and feelings only if they believe it's safe to do so. Too many spouses don't want to communicate on anything deeper than a superficial level because they've learned from experience that their partner does not react well to them when they share. For example, some spouses have discovered that if they share their true thoughts and feelings with their partner just dismisses their feelings as no big deal and basically tells them to get over it. There's no sympathy. There's no tenderness. There's no empathy. So why even share, right? Or their partner pretty much ignores them. What they say to their partner just seems to be in one ear and out the other. It seems like their partner doesn't really even care about how they feel. So why bother even doing it, right? Or when they're really honest with their spouse, their partner tends to get defensive or angry or accusing or combative if what they're sharing with him or her is unpleasant or unflattering. So they learn it's better to just not bring it up. Or their partner repays their honesty and openness with quiet anger, expressed through cold shoulders, silent treatment, guilt trips. Think about it. Their partner basically punishes their spouse for being honest with them. They punish their spouse for being honest. Let me ask you this. Is your relationship a safe place for truth? Is it? Through the way you respond in your words, actions, and attitudes, do you punish your spouse for being truthful with you? For being honest and open? As the last note on the note sheet says, the oneness and intimacy of your marriage is dependent on your ability to be honest and vulnerable with each other. Is it not on the sheet? Did it not get included? Did she run out of space? Sorry about that. We'll write it in. The oneness and intimacy of your marriage is dependent on your ability to be honest and vulnerable with each other. Sometime soon, if you're brave enough, you might consider asking your spouse this: do you feel safe sharing your thoughts and feelings with me? And if not, why not? That takes courage to ask that. Now, it's possible, if you're brave enough to ask your spouse that question, it's possible you may not like how your husband or wife answers that question. So as you listen to what they have to say in response, keep this in mind. James 1, 19 through 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Quick to listen, slow to speak. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. What's that tell you? Slow to speak and slow to become angry, because anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. If you and I just run with our anger in the moment, it's going to take us into places that God does not desire for us to go. And it's not going to be good. So, wrapping it up, can you sincerely say to your spouse the following? If you choose to communicate and share your heart with me, I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to belittle or insult you. I'm not going to just tune you out or ignore you, because I love you. Because I don't just care about you, I care about us. I'm going to choose to listen. And before I respond to whatever it is you say, I'm going to make sure that I've really heard you and understand where you're coming from. Are you really saying this? I will do my best. It may be hard, but I will do my best to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to jump to conclusions, and slow to become angry. In 1 Corinthians 13, in about that chapter about love, it says, one of the ways that love is defined, it says, love is not easily angered. And so I'm going to try real hard to love you the way I know that God wants me to. And be slow to anger. Are you willing to be brave enough to love your spouse enough to care about the health of your marriage enough to ask your spouse whether or not your marriage is a safe place for truth? Everyone, please stand. I'm going to ask musicians to take your places. And as they